This next panel discussion that we will be getting into will diverge into the topic of Sanskrit. It's titled as The Language of God, Sanskrit. Let me get the finest panel of panelists here to join me here. Let me start by inviting Dr. David Frowley. Give me applause, ladies and gentlemen, while I welcome them on the stage with Nagaraj Paturi, Sampadananda Misra, and will be moderated by Hema Hari. So this will be a 30-minute session, ladies and gentlemen, and you could indulge yourself into the finest panel here talking about Sanskrit. Over to you.
Thank you, Earth team, and thank you for organizing this beautiful session. We will start quickly, and we have about 30 minutes, and I have a great panel here of linguists and scholars, and I'm sure you will be able to get the essence of Sanskrit after this session. Two things I want to make as my opening remark before I ask each one to speak a few words. One, the session is called Language of Gods. Two keywords, language and gods. Now today actually Dr. Frowley and I were fortunate to be part of a panel about sacred ecologies, and where we actually spoke about how in India nature has been considered sacred, and nature has been seen as God. So Deva is the word we normally use, Divya and then Deva, and language is something which is got ethos as well as the way of communication embedded in it. So Deva Bhasha, that is what we call Sanskrit. And another interesting thing, today when we write in English, we write the word Sanskrit as S-A-N-S-K-R-I-T. And if you really look at the English language, anything S-A-N-S actually stands for sans, without. And the real meaning of the word Sanskrit is that which is well done, well refined. And krit means to do, and done well. So Sanskrit, when you say, that means it's without any refinement, or without aspect comes into it. So we normally take a conscious effort to write it as Sanskrit. And so first what we will do is, nature, when you say this is a Deva Bhasha and it has come from nature, I would like to start with asking Professor Sampadanand Mishra to speak about why do we connect Sanskrit with nature and say this is a language from nature?
Namaste to everyone. The first point that I would like to make here, that Sanskrit or Sanskritam is not the original name of this language. The original name of this language, as used by Panini in his Ashtadhyayi, is Bhasha. So Bhasha comes from the root sound bhash, to speak. But at the same time, you have another root sound called bhash, which means to bark. So bhash, like dogs barking, is bhash, and bhash is to speak. Now in Sanskritam, you will find when you go deep into every seed sound, what does a mean, what does a mean. So most of the times you will find these long syllables, they draw out the energy and expand it. When there is an expansion of energy, so the bhash, the barking, the unnecessary sounds or the animal sounds becomes a conscious speech sound of the human beings. Bhash, bhashate. And it's a language which is organically grown. And when we say that organically grown language, and a language sculpted to perfection, that's why Sanskritam, which is actually not a noun but an adjective, Sanskritam. So it's a past passive participle form, and every PPP or past passive participle form is an adjective. So it's not the name, and this name came much later. So Sanskritam, an organically grown language, which is also known as a mantric language. It has a mantric value. It has an aesthetic value. It has a scientific value. So if I put it in these three forms, three ideals of this language, the mantric ideal, the aesthetic ideal, and the scientific ideal. The mantric ideal of a language is that it grows organically. It follows the laws of the nature in its birth, growth, and development, and comes from the root sounds, comes from the seed sounds, and each seed sound is connected with the fundamental experiences of the human beings, of the conscious beings. And the aesthetic value, the aesthetic ideal is the flow, the chandas, the rhythm, the harmony of the language. And the scientific ideal is the opposite of the spiritual or mantric ideal, which follows the rigorous logic, the analysis in explaining the content of the experience. So in the mantric ideal, there are three things, like when a mantric language or the language of the gods or a divine language, so the efficiency, the efficacy of the language in communicating, in expressing, giving expression to the inner experience by using minimum number of words, by using minimum expenditure of energy, and by expressing it in a rhythmic way without loss of the content of the experience. So that's what defines what a divine language is, or what a mantric language is. So first
Can
thing
you give us
that
an
it has,
example?
yeah, I'll just give you example, like using minimum number of words, minimum expenditure of energy, and without losing the content of the experience. For example, the sutra style of composition, the mantras are very, very unique to this language. Say Panini, Maharshi Panini, who is considered to be the father of Sanskrit grammar, he could give us a description of more than, 300 millions of vocabularies by using approximately 4,000 compact sentences, which are called sutras. And sutras, the Panini sutras are very, very compact. Sometimes a single syllable, sometimes two syllables, sometimes three syllables, even sometimes a little longer. If you want to get an experience of a longer sutra in Panini, it is like Tiddhanai, Dvayasaja, Dadhanach, Matrach, Thak, Thank, Vank, Kwarap. It could be considered as a longer thing, which you can express it in just in 1 or 2 seconds. Otherwise, T, Gu, Bham, these are, like sometimes the sutras, which are monosyllabic sutras. And so, in such a compact way, one could give expression to the deeper, profounder, subtle ideas. So that's the uniqueness of this language, which makes it a perfect language. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to actually, sometime I would like you to give an example of the dhi that you normally use. Maybe in the second round, you can, educate people on how to approach these kind of root words. I've heard you expound on the word and the root dhi itself beautifully. And to Dr. Paturi now, he spoke about Panini. And so from this nature and the sounds in nature, how did it get into such a structural form? Could you just tell us how this language has evolved over time and the contribution of Panini, and what is grammar really?
May I ask the audience, how do you learn your alphabet in your childhood? All over India, in all the Indian languages, A, I, U. The way we learn it, we start with vowels and then go to consonants, and the consonants are also ordered in such a way that we have kaka gaganga in one line. They all come from kanthya. All of them are kanthyas. Then you have chacha jajhanya, talavyas. They come from the jaws. And you have dantyas, murdhanyas, tata dadhana. They come from the scalp. And you have dantyas, tata dadhana, which come from the teeth. And you have oshtyas, papa babhama. all these are listed in such an orderly way, scientific way. Nowhere in the world, no language in the world, no script in the world is taught so systematically. All the alphabet, the very word alphabet is coming from alpha beta, which is the mother method for A, B, C, D. Where do you have the vowels in it? We usually in the schools say that A, E, I, O, U are the vowels. They are not even vowels. They are the names of the letters which may indicate vowels. So a student of English, for example, cannot know vowels in his language until somebody linguistically, phonologically, scientifically teaches him what are vowels in English. Whereas in India, all the students of all Indian languages by the age of 3 know what are vowels in their language, all come in a line. And then all the consonants come in a line. And all the consonants come in an order in these languages. All this started with a shastra called Siksha. And this Shiksha and these Pratishakyas were started as Vedangas, and these Vedangas were created to protect what was the natural manifestation of a tapas experience, a yogic experience of Brahmarshis. So that is how nature got manifest. Natural sacral ecology got manifest in the form of the language called Sanskrit. And luckily, fortunately for all of us, the rishis were interested in protecting that sacrality scientifically, rigorously through Vedangas. And one of these Vedangas, Shiksha, created this system of phonologically analyzing how the sound is produced, from where it comes. Today, if any phonetics course anywhere in the world has a very clear description of phonetics of any language in the world, it is all due to the Sanskrit phonology coming from the Shiksha, which was way back at the time of Vedas itself. The whole world is indebted to the Sanskrit scientists called rishis who created Siksha for the phonetics and phonology that is responsible, for example, for speech recognition softwares, text-to-speech softwares. Wherever they go, the phonetics analysis that is coming from, the scientific analysis of phones that is coming from, is all rooted only in Shiksha, the Sanskrit phonology that was created way back. And Panini takes it into his Maheshwara Sutras for a very crisp codification of these sounds to be used in the sutras in a pratyahara paddhati. That's a cryptology. That pratyahara paddhati can be used for encryption today. Without numerical encryptions, you can do alpha encryption itself, character encryption itself, to codify letters. That methodology of Maheshwara Sutras and Pratyaharas that is created in Panini's Ashtadhyayi has many such implications. So that is why you might hear things like Sanskrit has computer science in it. Sanskrit is the most suitable for computers and all that. It's there may be some exaggerations and irrational claims in that, but when you see the rigor of codification of the language itself, the grammar itself, you will definitely get amazed and see as though they were doing it for some computer or computer-like system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paturi. Actually, his explanation about the alphabets and how they progressively have been arranged also makes me want to tell you about another fact. It's not just in the Sanskrit language alone, but you see that progression, idea of scientifically arranging sounds in music as well. For example, the Sarigama Padhani, the Saptaswara, also progress like Shadjam, Rishabam, and Gandharam, Madhyamam, Panchamam, like that. They all progress, and those swaras essentially come. They've been given those swaras based on the place of origin of the sound as it travels through your sound canal within your body. So this idea of scientifically looking at language, music, has been an inherent aspect in the Indian ethos. And he has actually beautifully laid the path forward to talk about the whether Sanskrit came only with Panini or did it exist before, because he also spoke about Bhasha, and what is very special about the Veda, which is also composed in the Sanskrit language. And I would like Dr. Frawley, who is for most Indians today the modern Rishi version of Rishi for all Indians today, I would like you to talk about Sanskrit and Veda.
Namaste, thank you, thank you. Well, first of all, everything in the universe is vibration, which is language. Even there's a vibration pervading the whole of space. All energies are made up of vibration. So language is a cosmic reality. It is not just simply a creaturely expression. We have creaturely languages, and more sophisticated in human beings than animals perhaps, but we also have a universal language pervading space. And the laws of the universe, the dharmas, or we call Mahatattva, is also made up of vibratory patterns, mantric sounds, cosmic laws, which is what the great rishis and yogis find and discover. In language, we have two things. We have sound, or shabda, and we have meaning, or bhava, which is also Shakti and Shiva. And language is inherent in our very organism. For example, we speak with the outgoing breath. In fact, prana is also a kind of language. Heartbeat is also a kind of language. Thought is also a kind of language. So what the rishis understood was this cosmic dimension of language, and we have a correlation of sound and meaning. And when we have correlation of sound and meaning in ordinary language, it becomes poetry. Mantra is even a deeper level. Take the English word peace versus the Sanskrit word shanti. Which conveys the bhava or the meaning of peace, meaning of shanti more? Word peace means a truce between two wars. Word shanti has that deeper dimension. Om. Om means all the divine, universal, cosmic energies, holds all of that without having an explicit meaning as a term like God. It vibrates within us. The sound creates the meaning. So in the Vedas, the idea is that there is this cosmic sound vibration that creates everything at the level of sound, meaning, energy, and light, like thunder and lightning. Your language is also projecting the meaning, the light, the understanding. So there is this universal application of sound, which is what Veda looks into. And prime sounds, as in bija mantras, Om, Hrim, Shrim, all these mantras that are taking us from an outer level of specific meaning to an inner level of universal meaning. That is why a mantra like Om can mean everything and nothing, and it can't be made into a specific term like a cow, a horse, a chair, or anything else. So the Vedas preserve a deeper cosmic mantric level of meaning that gets amplified, more specific, and more, even to some extent, intellectualized in the classical Sanskrit.
Thank you, Dr. Frawley. Couple of things that he said about meaning, I would like to tell you about two things. Like, for example, these two words show that there's so much of science, knowledge of science embedded within the language itself and its construct of the words. We didn't need, India did have various branches of Shastra, but then even basic words like Bhu-Gol, the moment you say that, you automatically know that the language knows that the earth is round. Bhu is earth, Gol is round. And that automatically, even a 5-year-old who says Bhu-Gol, he will know that he's talking about a spherical earth. Similarly, he spoke about heart and Hridayam. Look at the way we like to talk about this as Hridayam, Harati, Dadati, Yayati. So how it takes, gives, and circulates. Or the meaning of heart, the functioning of heart is embedded in this word itself. And from that perspective, I would like to ask Professor Sampadananda Mishra ji to explain, give us an example. He has got a beautiful example of thee. And from there on, tell us how today we can attempt to learn this language, because people often say that Sanskrit is a dead language, no longer used, and there is no need for it. So I would like our esteemed panel to tell us what is the place that this language has for today and for the future as well, and how to go about learning or understanding this language. Many of us can't really take a very formal course, do a PhD or a MA or anything, but then how else can we learn this language which is part of our roots?
So taking it forward from what Pandit Vamadeva Shastri ji spoke about, there's a perfect relationship between sound and sense. Wherein in the formal conventional languages, you were not allowed to ask this question, why this is called hand, why this is called head, why this is called nose. But in Sanskrit, you can ask this question, in Sanskritam, you can ask this question that why a particular word is used for a particular idea or for a particular object, because there is a perfect relationship between sound and sense. So the sound and sense both have emerged from the same depth of the vibration, the Adi Spanda, what he mentioned in his inaugural speech. So we can take hundreds and thousands of examples, because an organically grown mantric or divine language, it emerges from this vibration, the pure vibration called the spanda, the spandana. And each spandana is connected with the fundamental experience, a certain experience of the truth. And the sound is the translation or the holistic essence of that experience. So coming to give you little examples, and then how understanding the root sound and understanding the root experiences behind the sounds, it helps us understanding all languages from a deeper perspective. And then we understand the universal value of this language. Say a very famous example that I give, even Ram Swarup ji and Pandit Vamadev Shastri ji, they have also mentioned about this example, and I will elaborate a little bit on it because looking at the time constraint. So the root sound is tha. So STH, stha. So you take any example, any words derived from it, pratishtha, sthanam, sthapati, astha, sanstha. So if you look at all the meanings of it, it leads towards this sense that anything which is immobile, like a place is called sthanam because it doesn't move. You can't say, oh, Delhi was here and then last year and then it has shifted now. So because it is fixed, it is immobile. And from this sense of immobility, the idea of strength comes. Like you said that, oh, it's so heavy that I can't move it. He is so strong, so rigid that I can't move him. So the idea of obstinacy, rigidity, immobility, fixity. So all these things are the root sense of root stha. And then you take in English, say for example, any word beginning with ST or ending with ST or having ST in the middle like establishment or obstinacy or station, stable, stagnant. So all these words, they have these meanings of immobility, rigidity, obstinacy. So that's how you can see a deeper connection of all the languages in the world. So coming back to your question that how this language can be taken forward. So many people call it as a dead language. Of course, it's not a, looking at the time constraint, it's difficult to answer to this question. But the language is very much alive. It's not just a dead language is a technical term or a term which has been translated as Mruta Bhasha, because dead can have so many connotations. So when you say dead telephone, it is not equivalent to dead body. When you say this is a dead letter, when you attributively use it, or as an adverb you use it, like he's walking dead slow, it doesn't have the same meaning like a dead body. So dead is defunct. So this language is so much alive in us. So the best way of taking it forward, what I have thought, and I have spoken about it in many platforms, that in India, what is going to work out, that let's strengthen each and every regional language along with Sanskrit as a part of every Indian language. So for example, like if we give 100 marks to say Odia or Bengali, don't give full 100 marks, so keep 40 marks Sanskrit and then 60 marks the mother tongue. So this is how, if we can plan, then Sanskrit becomes a part of it, because 70 to 80% of Indian languages are pure Sanskrit words. Look at the names of people, Indian names. If you can remember 100 Indian names, so 90 to 95 Indian names will be pure Sanskrit words. And then if you have one word, one name, then you have two different words. For example, you say Rajani Kanta. You have the word Rajani, which means night. Kanta means one who is fond of. You take Karuna, Nidhi, so Karuna and Nidhi. You take Jaya, Lalita. You get so many words. So make yourself familiar with the Indian names. Ask whomever you meet the meaning of the names. You can develop all the vocabularies. So there are many practical ways of taking this language forward, but the language should be compulsory, and each and every child born in India must learn Sanskrit.
Yes. That's very good, and I would encourage all of you to follow him on Twitter, where he gives a lot of these kind of examples that can enrich your vocabulary on a daily basis. I would like Dr. Paturi, who's doing a lot of work with academics on bringing back the language, the linguistics, and the ethos into present-day applications in day-to-day governance and humanities and so on. So, Doctor, can you throw some light on how the future that you see for this language with respect to people who are in these fields, especially?
Yeah, we have started courses, for example, on Vedic psychology. We are going to start courses on Vedic public administration, Vedic statecraft, Vedic anthropology, Vedic sociology, Vedic political science, almost Vedic everything. You have whatever contemporary disciplines you have are being revived from the Vedic sources, Shastric sources. Let us all remember that our books talk about classical European sources like Greek and Latin sources. Law has a lot of Greek in it, Latin in it. Medical vocabulary has a lot of Greek and Latin in it. When we create our own words in Hindi medium or Oriya medium or Bengali medium, also we are using a lot of Sanskrit in it. But when we go to the roots of all these words, just the way a European goes to the roots of those words, they would reach the Greek philosophy and Greek and Latin understanding. We can go to the roots of our understanding from the Sanskrit vocabulary that we are using in our regional languages. And there in Europe, what happened is, because a new religion came which categorized all the Greco-Roman culture and philosophy, the classical culture, as pagan and opposed it, they lost connection with it. Luckily, we have not called our Sanskritic culture, Vedic culture as something pagan, and we did not reject it. We are still living that culture, and we are still living Sanskrit culture. We are still living Vedic culture. So there is absolutely no question of death to it as long as we are not going to reject it as pagan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paturi. And we had a session earlier about the soft power, India's soft power, and yoga and mind and mindfulness, and all these were spoken about as some of the soft power. But all of this, like Dr. Frawley says, will not be possible without an understanding of Sanskrit. And Doctor, I would like you to elaborate on that and tell us about the future that lies for India in this sphere.
Yes, it's a very important point here for everyone. You cannot understand Indian civilization in any field or any area without understanding the basic Sanskrit terminology behind it. And one of the biggest problems, whether it's social, political, religious, whatever level, is that in India, you're not using Sanskrit terms, you're using the terms of Western theology, Western politics. And so the Indian civilization, which is Bharatiya Sanskriti, comes out either misinterpreted or looking bad or looking incorrect. So it's very important that all these prime terms, Sanskrit terms of the Indian civilization, are known by everyone. And these are also spreading worldwide with yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda. In yoga, we have terms like prana, guru, buddhi, chakras. There's not an equivalent for these in the other languages because they did not study with the same depth. And in the Indian context, terms like dharma, stop translating dharma, karma into other things that are not equivalent to them. So you need to reclaim Sanskrit to reclaim and sustain your own civilization. And you don't necessarily have to know how to speak Sanskrit, but you at least need to know what the prime terms of the Indic civilization are in the Sanskrit terminology, even science, mathematics. And as we move forward, Sanskrit can actually have better terms for psychology than Western thought has. Sanskrit, you have all the panchakoshas, chitta, buddhi, manas, ahankara. You have study of consciousness, samadhi on all these different levels. Western thought doesn't have these terminology. Even take something like cosmology. Consciousness is a universal principle, akasha. These terms, or they talk about waves, particles, nada, bindu. The Sanskrit language has this specificity of science, consciousness, higher awareness, subtle energy. It's the basis of all linguistics in the world actually came out of the Sanskrit language. And even more important, the Sanskrit understanding of language, which is to move from the particular to the universal. Western language is always from the universal to the particular. A chair, a cow, something specific. Sanskrit is to universalize everything. Prana is ultimately universal prana. Agni is also universal prana. Language of mantra. Mantra is spreading worldwide. Bija mantras can only be understood according to the correlation of sound and sense. Om, Hrim, Krim, Shrim. All these go back to the prime roots of the Sanskrit language. Future, universality, eternal, infinite. That is the Sanskrit Bhasha.
Thank you so much. And on this futuristic note, I don't want to end this session. I want to make it a beginning for practice of all of us to become Sanskritized. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you would have enjoyed and taken a lot of takeaway points from this session. Thank you. Namaste.